So I wanted to kick off today with the social aspect of things, with the personal grassroots aspect of things. I don't want to lose the fact that we are advocates. Primarily it's MassBike, and it really comes from grassroots up. But we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the policies, some of the frameworks with which we operate, especially in terms of engineering. Actually, I didn't decide who was going to go first, but Brian, are you okay going next?
Yep.
Okay, great. So we have Brian from the city of Worcester who will introduce himself and some of the work that he's doing. It's going to be a total gear shift, but I want to try to encourage you to keep all of this flowing in the back of your brain, again with kind of a public health lens, again with probably an equity lens as well. And we're going to talk about complete streets in the next big bucket topic that we've got going on. And then we'll have a quick breakout session, and we'll try to get back on track time-wise. We're a little behind, but I think we'll make it up. Great. Give us to your presentation.
Do you want to send questions about?
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Yeah. So we'll have two presentations, and we'll have a quick break for our questions, and then we'll go into our breakout sessions.
All right, well, good morning. Thanks everybody for coming. My name is Brian Pigeon. I'm a transportation planner with the city of Worcester. I started a couple months ago, and kind of the main thrust of my work is helping to implement complete streets in the city. And so what I'd like to talk about today is, first off, the Main Street Reimagine project that we're working on, which is kind of our first real complete street in the city, and then some of the policies that we're doing internally to try and make sure that complete streets really is the lens that we look through when we're designing our streets here. So first off, what is a complete street? This is taken from the National Complete Streets Coalition. Basically, what it boils down to is a complete street is a street for everyone. And it doesn't really seem like it should be that radical of a proposition, but for the last 50, 60 odd years, we've really only been designing our roads with one goal in mind, and that's moving cars as quickly as possible. And complete streets kind of turns that on its head and makes us focus on everybody using the road. And so the first real example of this in the city of Worcester is what we're calling Main Street Reimagine. And that is a complete top to bottom reconstruction of Main Street in the central business district. We want our Main Street to be someplace that people actually go to rather than just going through. And we've got a lot of really great cultural amenities downtown, and we wanted to build on those and really connect those in order to make downtown Worcester a really vibrant place. And I think our city manager really summed it up well at the groundbreaking. He said that this is really imagining a road for all users. So I want to do a couple before and after pictures. So this project is underway right now. If you've been to Main Street recently, a lot of it's torn up. We're expecting it to be done sometime in 2020. But here we are on Main Street. We're looking north from Elm Street. And when you look at this, how does this street make you feel? Yeah, this is it's not a place that you want to spend time. The fact that it's overcast and this is taken, it probably doesn't help much either. But it's really not an inviting space, and we want downtowns to be inviting, particularly main streets. Right now it's 4 lanes, and that just doesn't really make for a healthy downtown. And so what we're envisioning, we're going to widen the sidewalks here, and we're going to take it from 4 lanes down to 2 lanes with a few turn lanes at various points. And then we're going to take that space that we've recaptured and widen the sidewalks, put in some, we've got some 6-foot bike lanes on either side there. And we're going to put in street trees to make it a little more inviting, make it a little, add some shade, clean the air up a little bit. And the lighting here, what we have right now on Main Street, we have big highway-style overhead lights. And those work fine for cars, but they're really not great for people. So we want to change our lighting to make it more at a human scale. This is another segment a little bit further up the road, closer to Mechanics Hall, which is a performance venue here in the city. And again, it just feels really underutilized in this picture. It doesn't feel like the sort of place that people want to congregate, and that's what we want people to do here. Mechanics Hall is one of 3 sort of cultural nodes we want to focus on in this project. And what we're imagining Again, we've got bike lanes, we've got widened sidewalks, and right in front of where the theater is, we've really bumped the sidewalk out there. So it's a place that people can congregate, that people can really spend time there. And we're going to have public art throughout this whole segment and really try and activate that space. You'll also notice that all the intersections, we've really bumped out the curves, and that does a couple different things. It makes it a shorter crossing distance for people crossing the street. It also makes people crossing a lot more visible to drivers. And it forces drivers to really slow down as they're making their turns, which is safer for everybody. And a little further up the road, closer to the Palladium, again, just not an inviting street space. And what the Palladium is another one of our cultural nodes. This is, if you're not familiar with it, it's a concert hall for a lot of rock shows. We played there quite a bit. And what we're doing here is similar, but you'll notice the northbound bike lane has actually been shifted over a little bit here. And we did that to prevent any right hook crashes at the turn there onto MLK Boulevard. That's a really important connection to Interstate 290, and so there's going to be a lot of truck traffic going through there as well, and we really want to avoid those type of crashes. So we've got a mixing zone here where bikes can move over, and everybody's a little more visible, and it's going to be safer for everybody going through that corridor. And the last of our cultural nodes is the Hanover Theater. This is a really great performance space for Broadway style shows and that kind of thing. And right now we've got a plaza in front of it that's kind of underutilized right now. It's got streets on both sides, so people don't really go there to spend time. And what we'll be doing with this one, the fountain is not functioning. We're going to take that out. The colonnade, we're going to take that out as well, and they're going to be purposed somewhere else to be determined in the city. And we're going to extend the plaza out to the theater there. So that section of Southbridge Street is actually going to be rerouted, so we can really have a full plaza here that people want to spend time at. And this is just a conceptual rendering of what it might be that hasn't been fully determined yet. I believe there's going to be a public meeting on that later this summer, but that has not been determined quite yet. But just to get people thinking about what that space could be. We're also going to have a lot of public art and wayfinding signs associated with this project. We're currently accepting proposals right now for designers who want to put in bike racks or benches in this section, and artists who want to do art panels and wayfinding signs. So if you know somebody who does that kind of thing, tell them to get cracking because the deadline's Friday. So when we launched this project, the initial proposal was that we were going to just sort of repave it and put it down exactly as it had been. And this project is largely funded by money from the state. And the state looked at those plans and they said, no, you've got to rethink this. So they were really big in pushing a lot of the improvements that we're going to have on Main Street right now. And that's great. But what do we do with projects that aren't largely funded by the state? The city passed a complete streets policy in late 2017, and we're now moving ahead in the state's complete streets program. We're fortunate enough in Massachusetts that we do have a state complete streets program that helps fund municipalities actually moving forward in this direction. So it's a three-step process. Tom, I don't know if you're going to talk about that at all.
A little bit, yes.
Okay, so I'm not going to see where you're going there, but basically we're on to the next step, and over the course of the next few months, we're going to put together a list of prioritized projects that we want to advance going forward. So now we're working to incorporate complete streets in what we do at the city. One of the main things that we have going on right now, and this is identified in the complete streets policy, was developing the Transportation Advisory Group. And that's an internal group made up of city staff to bring different departments together and have everybody collaborate on making new policies and reviewing different transportation proposals. Made up of a lot of different offices in the city, public health, Penelope's there as well. And we've got a regional planning commission, the Chamber of Commerce, some of our advocates in Walk Bike Worcester, as well as some of the universities are involved in that as well. And so what we're working on right now is developing the Complete Streets checklist that we're going to use to review different projects. We're working on what our evaluation criteria are going to be, so we're going to go back to the 5 E's. We don't really have that yet, but that's what we're going to be working on developing over the next coming months. Right now, the Transportation Advisory Group is reviewing different projects that are coming up for resurfacing and construction, and any projects that are going before the planning or the zoning board. We're meeting with those applicants and suggesting different ways that they can incorporate complete streets treatments. So that's pretty much what I have right now. I think we're going to save questions till the end, so Tom can have his time to speak. But if you have questions, I'm going to be here all day. If you have, planning questions, feel free to email us at the planning department. This is not going to be the last complete streets project that we have. This is really just the very beginning. But I'm glad you're all here, and thanks for coming in.
Okay. Cool. And progression.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm Tom DiPaolo. I'm Assistant Chief Engineer at MassDOT. I'm 33 years at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. I've been in my current role for 21 years. I deal a lot with our design policies at the agency, and I've worked quite a bit with the advocacy groups like MassBike, Walk Boston over the years. We have a couple of my colleagues here today. I'd like to recognize Cheryl and Tim from our District 5 office, and Rick from our District 3 office is here. I think that's everyone from MassDOT, right? Yes. So we're all here to work with you today and answer any questions you might have.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about 3 general topics today. Road to Complete Streets. I'm going to do a little overview of our statewide bike plan, and I'm going to talk about the Complete Streets funding program. So the Road to Complete Streets. Some of you may have seen some of these slides. They're a bit cartoonish. I presented these last year at the bike boot camp in Somerville. I think it was last year.
Yeah, I think it was last February.
Yeah. Was anybody there besides Galen? There were a few people. So I apologize if it's a repeat, but what I tried to do is sort of frame up where we've been over the last 20 or so years. Beginning way back, this Chapter 87 of the Acts of 1996 was the first piece of legislation that I was familiar with that focused on accommodating pedestrians and bicyclists in our project. And it essentially said that the Highway Department should make reasonable accommodations, and must make reasonable accommodations for biking and walking in all of its projects. Things like that can be challenging for an agency. Legislation is great, but then we have to enact it. We have to do something with it. This E97-4 is engineering directive that we issued in response to that a year later, that essentially framed how we would accommodate bikes and pedals. And at the time we were a metric agency, and you see we called 5 meters, about 16 feet, 16 and a half feet, is desirable space from the edge of the road to the center line for a bicyclist and a vehicle to share space with a 4.5-foot minimum. And I believe we also indicated that one sidewalk, continuous sidewalk, was reasonable accommodation for pedestrians. We put a person in a full-time role as a bike and ped coordinator that reviewed projects for compliance to the directive and addressing the legislation. And it was sort of the beginning of our formal review for accommodation of bikes and peds. Through the years, beginning in 1999, we started a series of working groups that talked further about many of these issues and sort of led eventually, go on to the next, in 2006, the Green Box, we issued a new project development and design guide that was recognized throughout the nation as being something a little different than what state highway departments have done in the past, where there was additional emphasis on accommodating bikes and pedestrians in projects, multimodal accommodation. Some of these terms that you see that sort of have evolved to what we call complete streets today, context-sensitive design. Not every road is the same, not all the users are the same. We really need to design for the area. Roads in Cambridge are different than roads in Springfield, they're different than roads in Monson, Massachusetts. So that's the context part of it. Flexible design, we need to be flexible in what we do. We can't be rigid. Not everything is the same. The multimodal, of course, and now the term that's most widely used is complete streets. The important committee that we started before the guidebook was issued, I might talk a little more about it, is this Design Exception Review Committee. Those of you that have dealt with MassDOT over the years know that we have standards for everything. We get our money from the Federal Highway Administration. The Federal Highway Administration expects us to have standards and follow standards, and it's good engineering that no matter what you engineer, there are standards for doing anything. The tables and chairs that you're sitting at are designed to some sort of standard to accommodate your needs. It doesn't mean that every table and chair is the same, just like not every road is the same, but there are standards that we base everything on. And we often have to make exception to those standards to be flexible, to address multimodal accommodation, to address the context of the area we're in. So for the last 16 years, we've had a committee that takes a look at every design exception that we make. I chair that committee, and some people in this room have been in the room with us and have been part of it. David Watson was there, and Tom Francis comes to most of our meetings today. 2004, the Bike Ped Advisory Board was formed. It's still going on today. We met here within the last 6 months. It's run by MassDOT, but there's a group of from various advocacies and organizations. Environmental Affairs is represented, Health and Human Services is represented, and it's been a good thing for MassDOT. Next cartoon. So we continue to evolve over the years. After the guidebook was issued, we firmed up a little more what we consider desirable accommodation or minimum accommodation for bikes and peds. It was now 2 sidewalks, not just one. Our standards changed to a 16-foot in English, desirable distance, 15-foot minimum. Throughout the years, we evolved again, and in 2013, there was a very important policy that the Highway Department issued called the Healthy Transportation Policy, which put further pressure on us to accommodate all users in our projects. The Healthy Transportation Policy further required within the agency, it wasn't legislated on us, but that we give extra attention to accommodating bikes and peds, and when we can't meet the goals of the policy, that we need special permission from the Secretary of Transportation, Stephanie Pollack herself, to advance the project. So the Secretary of Transportation has actually approved all of the projects over the years since about 2014 that don't provide the desirable accommodations that we set, which is now a 5-foot minimum shoulder for a cyclist, and 2 sidewalks on roads in urbanized areas. E14-1 is an engineering directive that we issued to respond to that healthy transportation policy. It's run reasonably well. I want to say sometimes it's a lot of work, but it's important work. And I think the discussions that we have, Tom can attest to it, about every single project and how we have to address accommodation of all users are healthy discussions. And we don't always succeed. We have an old infrastructure in Massachusetts, and it's hard to make changes in areas for various reasons. That Worcester job that Brian talked about, Main Street, I think, David, you were at the table when that first came in, and you remember how the committee saw it and said, what is the city doing out here? Why are there 4 lanes of traffic on this road and no room for bikes? And we did kick it back, and I sort of lost touch with it over the years, and I was very happy to see what it's become, because that's one of the great success stories, I think, of the committee that we have. I think I have one more cartoon. 2015, we issued another really groundbreaking book, a guide for separated bike lanes. As we evolve over the years, we used to just talk about a width where bikes could sort of share the road with cars. And in 2015, we issued our own guidebook on how to build separated accommodations, which is becoming more and more the norm as we go through the years. I'm going to touch on these next two subjects, bike and ped plan that MassDOT had not. We haven't issued new bike and ped plans in about 15 years, and we're going to issue both of them, I hope, this year. They've been in draft form for a long time, and then I'll talk a little about our Complete Streets Funding program. So very briefly, the statewide bike plan. How many are familiar with this? Involved in public outreach? I think this is, I'm just going to go briefly through where this has been. A few years ago, we started the planning process for this. This sort of frames everything that we want to do for bicyclists and the ped plan for pedestrians going forward maybe for the next decade. We tried very hard to make it a useful plan, not just state that we want to do certain things, but put contextual things in there that will provide guidance to municipalities, provide guidance to our staff, and really set a framework for how we're going to achieve our goals. These companion documents, the resource guides, are available online right now. One for walkability, one for bikeability. These were designed for municipalities, really. They're super tools that provide a ton of information on how to go about doing all this, the planning needed, engineering guidance, maintenance of facilities, public outreach. If you're not familiar with it, check them out, and they're very easy to follow, and I was really happy with the way they came out. What else do I have here? This is briefly just a lot of public engagement during the planning process for this. Next slides are, this is really Pete Sutton's presentation for Springfield on Thursday, if you want to hear it. He's going to talk much more in depth about the bike plan. But we got a lot of feedback, and we did our best to incorporate as many comments as we could into the plan. A lot of online, in-person surveys, social media was used. We had listening sessions in 9 places around the state. And got a lot of great feedback that helped shape the contents of the plan. These are some of the things that we heard, some of the surveys that we took. No need to get into it. You guys are the ones that provided these comments, preaching to the choir here. But this is just an example of some of the things we asked about. I would like if, maintenance was very important. Snow and ice clearing, very big challenges for municipalities and for us. Access to transit, things like that. So connectivity was a big deal. Next slide. Vision of the plan. Biking in Massachusetts would be safe, comfortable, convenient option for everyday travel. We have goals that we framed. Next slide shows principles. I'm sorry to go through these quickly. I want to get into the Complete Streets discussion a little more. But, no surprises here, but the plan is very well laid out. And the next slide shows some firm initiatives on how we're going to meet those goals and principles. To build connected networks. Increasing safety is always a big concern. That, from a public agency, that's always our #1 goal, to provide safe facilities. And that's a big challenge, especially for biking, because I think for so often, you know, we've talked about accommodating bikes and peds in all of our projects, and quite honestly, the bicyclist was the last one on the list. Sidewalks have always been a part of our infrastructure, going back to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I can honestly say we have fewer challenges with the pedestrian infrastructure on our project. The bikes have always competed for that roadway space with motor vehicles. So it's been the biggest challenge to carve out a safe space for cyclists, whether it's through a little bit wider shoulder or whether it's through a separated path. And it continues to be a challenge, but I think we're making improvements, as you saw with that project in Worcester that Brian showed. Next slide. We need money, of course. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Complete Streets funding program, but the bike plan dedicates $60 million for spending on bike infrastructure. It doesn't say exactly how that's going to be spent, but it puts $60 million there that is generally probably split up between mostly our road and bridge projects that are at the bottom of the list, where we can identify monies specifically for road and bridge projects done by the state. We have Safe Routes to School projects. That's a federal program that's been a really successful program. Again, a challenge with that. Often those projects are geared towards walking, and we find ourselves more often than not trying to build bike accommodations into Safe Routes to School projects. And there's trail grants. The Highway Department has sort of taken the lead in lots of off-road trails. We have a partnership with the DCR, an organization that's largely responsible for off-road trail networks, but an organization that never had a lot of funding. We're a bigger group that's used to building big projects, so we've gotten together with them and have done a lot of great things with some of the off-road trails that most of which we don't own, but we help fund and construct. All right, let me jump into wrap up with Complete Streets funding. So 92% of the roads in Massachusetts are not ours. They are municipal roads. Little known fact. So the state has all the money, and we have a lot of resources, and we're here to help. But most of the roads in the Commonwealth, and most of the roads where biking and walking takes place, are municipal roads. And that's where this program, like the Complete Streets program, is so important. It puts a lot of money in the hands of local communities to address their needs in the best way possible. Cities and towns have always been funded through what's known as our Chapter 90 program, which is local aid. It's done on a formulaic basis, and municipalities have traditionally used their Chapter 90 money to repave their roads. A need, a very big need. As you know, there's a lot of poor infrastructure in Massachusetts, but public works directors have used the bulk of their Chapter 90 money to pave. There was a call a number of years ago to do more, thinking municipalities need to spend their local aid on better bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So the Complete Streets funding program was created, and it puts the next one. It puts $50 million in place to give out through a series of individual project grants over a number of years. We typically, since the program started in 2017, I believe, we've done a little bit more than $10 million a year in infrastructure grants. The program is set up, it's not just a giveaway program. Three tiers to the program. The first tier is a municipality has to be trained, go to training. We're not just going to give you money, we offer training, and somebody from the city has to go and take the training, and there's no quiz, you don't have to pass a test, but you have to be trained before you are even eligible to receive money. As part of tier 2, in part of tier 1 is the city or town has to pass a Complete Streets policy. And basically get as an official adoption that, yes, we embrace Complete Streets, and when we get this money, we're going to spend it wisely. Tier 2 is the development of a prioritization plan. to actually think about the needs of the community. Where do we want to spend the money? Where do we want to focus our attention? And we make $50,000 available for assistance in developing a prioritization plan. And then the tier 3, once you go through the first 2 tiers, you can actually apply for project funding. And the grants are available up to $400,000 per project. And we have 2 rounds of grant review and awards each year. I believe May 1st and October 1st are the deadlines for those each year. So twice a year we award money to try to give away 10, 12, 13 million dollars, whatever it works out to. As we get to nearer the end of the 50 million, we'll probably do something else to continue this program. I don't know exactly how it's going to be structured. Next slide. So this is a graphic of the communities that have been involved to date. It's pretty impressive. There's different colors, but the big number at the top, there are 230 out of the 351 cities and towns who have registered for the Complete Streets program. It continues to grow steadily. I don't know if we'll ever get to 351. This was as of last week, I think. There are some communities that probably will never register, but I think we can get to 300. 200 of those 230 have approved policies, so they've completed tier 1. 161 have approved prioritization plans, which means they've completed tier 2. And what's that add up for on projects? 80 and 106 projects have been awarded in 3 years of, and I think the 2020 projects have been under review. The districts may have been involved in that. The latest round that came in on May 1st, we're probably getting ready to award the first group of 2020 projects, fiscal year 2020. So it's been really successful, I think, and the projects have been spread out throughout the state and have a number of benefits, both pedestrian, bicycle, off-road bike path, bike parking, bike racks, connections to transit stations, not stations, but bus shelters, things like that have been popular. $400,000 goes a long way in municipality. For MassDOT, $400,000 is a very small project. I think for a municipality, though, doing this type of work, it's been very effective. I think I have some samples, slides of some projects that have been completed. Framingham was a 2-phase project that built an off-road trail. Pete's up to build these slides together. How's my time, Peter?
Yeah, just good.
And a few more. Taunton, Natick, Lynn. I wish I knew more about these projects. I brought a printout of all of them if anyone has specific questions later. I want to talk briefly about, I think, my last slide. So I want to cycle back to when we issued our guidebook in 2006. This was a guidebook that won a lot of awards nationally. And this was a page in the guidebook that sort of framed that multimodal accommodation, how we want to accommodate users. And it was tied to different standards for different types of accommodation, but essentially there were 5 types, anywhere from fully separate for all 3 users to the bottom, the type 5 accommodation where all 3 users share the same space. And we have all these types of roads in Massachusetts, and we still deal with all these accommodation cases in all of our projects. This framework, if we develop this today, I think there would at least be a 6th type that has become more and more popular, and it's much more like this 4th type, where the bikes and peds are separate, but they're not physically separated in this graphic. At the time, we didn't even have separated bike facilities in our guideline. Our 2015 separated bike lane guide introduced that concept. But essentially, we're doing a lot of accommodations now where we're trying to move the bikes and the pedestrians to a separate, physically separated space from motor vehicles. There's more and more demand for this. There's more and more opportunities being found to do this. We're in the process of revising some of our design guidance and engineering standards to address these changes that have happened over the years. We continue to evolve. Some of that, you know, if I went back to those graphics, probably in 2020 you'll see a new engineering directive that talks about new guidance that we're working on now. Our district people have seen it, where we're trying to reframe what we're trying to do, how we're trying to address all the users in all of our projects. And in 10 years, it may be even different. We're getting there. There's still obviously a ton of challenges. I talked about that design exception review committee. It's a great group, and we discuss in detail elements of projects. And more often than not, what we're discussing is life accommodation. Right, Tom? I mean, I'd say 80 to 90% of the issues that come before that group are dealing with shoulder width, travel lane width, and how do we best accommodate bikes who are legal users of our roads. And we have an obligation to accommodate bicyclists as much as we do to accommodate motor vehicles safely, so that people can get around, feel comfortable using the facilities. Biggest challenge we have still, and I admit it, and that's why I'm really happy to be here and hear your side of everything and some of the stories that you have to share, so we can evolve even further in the future. It's very different at MassDOT than it was 20 years ago when that first piece of legislation was passed, and I was there, and it was sort of taken, there were a lot of people that were upset by it, that who are these politicians telling us what to do? We know what's best for our users. That was really the attitude. I think it's different today, I really do. And you know, it's just been a process over the years where I don't think we're resistant. I mean, we're...
No, I would say, so I sit on these meetings and don't have the MassDOT historical experience when we're sitting there, and we'll call it a project, and I'm thinking, side path would be amazing, I never asked for that. And one of the engineers will suggest it, and I'm always shocked, like, what am I doing at the meeting? But these guys are taking much more of a firm hand on getting active transport in the plan and addressed. And it's great to see, it's awesome to me, and it's sure that it's a subset of people who meet the DDR, not a perfect sample of the points.
Right, yeah, the committee has been traditionally made up of representatives from all of our district offices, plus some folks in headquarters from our project management section, our highway design section, our complete streets engineer that works in highway design, planning sometimes attends Pete Sutton, but it was about 4 or 5 years ago, I forget, and David might remember when, that we had a lot of pressure for folks like you to come to the meeting to see what we're talking about. And there was resistance. And I don't think my bosses wanted to do it. And one day I'm like, well, why not? Why wouldn't we invite them? It might actually be helpful. So MassBike, Walk Boston, Livable Streets Alliance, every month gets the agenda. MassBike has been a regular attendee, David, through Richard, and Tom. Almost every month you're there. Charlie Dennison from Livable Streets gives us great feedback on projects. And it's really, I think, helped the group. I mean, you sit at the table with us. You're part of the group, and that's what we want. You know more about this stuff than we do. So,
yeah, no, it's a great experience to see how the process gets done, and also just the opposite. Because a lot of times you have a road where there's a cliff wall on the other side, the developments are really limited out of space, and trying to figure out, well, how do we fix that, or how do we break that? There's a lot of creativity that happens, and a lot of open-mindedness, and it is not the Cedar sausage shit maybe, just the way it last,
Great. Thank you, Tom. Alright, so Tom is an amazing resource, and while he's here, definitely grab his card, and we're going to take a few questions, but one thing I want to jump into is the shared conversation. So I do want to give the opportunity for a question or two, because I know it's right in the front of everybody's tongue. Then we're going to take a quick 10 minutes to stretch after the questions, and then collaboratively discuss exactly this last segue of how do we get the advocates, the community involved back in the process. And we're going to pass around white sheets to put your ideas down. So while Tom and Brian are taking the few questions, we're going to pass around the white sheets. We'll take about 10 minutes to do the white sheets as a group, and then we'll jump right back into some more of the topics. But the idea here is to get your voices out. I don't want this to be a one-sided conversation, so please feel free to interject. I'll give this back to you, and maybe bring it down the back.
You went kind of through the slides quickly. I'm wondering if you can find this online somewhere.
I can make it available. It's not online. Galen can maybe email it. What I'll do is I'll convert it to PDF.
There was stuff there that you had to go through quickly that I
Yeah.
wanted to take a look at.
Is there a way to share the slides with everyone as well after the fact? We'll check in on that.
Email?
Yeah, we'll find a way, if they're allowed to share it all, we'll find a way to spread to everybody as well.
I'll PDF it. It's a lot smaller file. I think the PowerPoint is 19 megabytes. PDF is much smaller. Yes, sir.
Is there, I know in the recreation community out there, there's a lot of interaction between states like Colorado, Massachusetts, or California, Washington, on best practices. Is there something that our state is doing, or a state that we're trying to model our pedaling after that is successful with having good success with it?
Yeah, I mean, that's our constant improvement. We're always looking for best practices. You know, we participate in a lot of national organizations too. So there are some states that we look to that there actually are very few that are that much ahead of us. But some states, I know Washington DOT has been sort of a model state. We also tap into some local consulting firms that have a lot of national expertise. The Tool Design Group is one that I believe helped write some of the national guidance. And they have an office in Massachusetts, and actually our Complete Streets engineer, Michelle Vanilla, formerly worked for Tool, and sort of a nationally recognized expert in this. But a lot of that expertise is in this region anyway. So I'm not saying we don't look nationally, but we often actually look to European countries for a lot of best practices as well. The Netherlands for biking in particular. But yeah.
And to kind of piggyback off of that, I will say that before Worcester, I was working in the Chicago area, and the Massachusetts separated bike design guidelines are kind of the gold standard right now in the United States. Lots of other states are looking to Massachusetts to really take the lead on that. Thank you.
Yes.
So I'm an electric car owner and take my bicycle in the car to get from the charging station to errands and stuff like that. So is there any consideration to accelerate bike friendliness around car and charging stations? And secondly, I think home values go up when sidewalks were added where they weren't there before. I wonder if those things are being considered.
Yeah, I mean, the economics part of it is if you read the bike plan, that's called out, that good biking infrastructure helps a strong economy. The electric charging, the electric vehicle, I'm not aware of that connection. It could be buried in there somewhere. It doesn't jump out at me as being something real prominent. It's not a bad idea. Again, evolving. There's more the connection to transit has been a big thing. thank you for that.
Cool. So we're like, one more and then we'll take a quick breather. Go for it.
It would seem that urban centers are the place where it's most challenging to accommodate the pedestrians and the bicycles together in a way that works. And whatever challenge that was, kudos to the state and local planners who made it work downtown in Kelly Square. And it would seem like some tools internally were developed to integrate that, even though the plans are separate. And it would seem like a good idea to make a plan statewide to address both, to help replicate that process wherever else, rather than have two separate plans.
Yeah, I think some of the new guidance we're working on is trying to better address that. You're right, it is the most challenging, but it's also probably, the most important. That's where you need to focus the most attention, where the people are. And some of the stuff, we issued our guidebook in 2006. It still works, but it's 13 years old now, and that's old for where we've been. So we've introduced an initiative. I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago where we went to the Secretary of Transportation and told her our plans to reissue the guidebook at some point in the future, and she was very excited about it. Just do what you can, get out bits and pieces of it, and this will be done differently than in the past. This won't be some grand rollout where we hire somebody and write a new book. This is going to be more of a implementing new pieces as they're developed. Like that 2015 separated bike lane guide. It exists, but it's separate from our design guide. We want to incorporate that and that thinking and anything that's come along since then in there. So, and we want to reference some of the tools that are also out there that others may have, like other DOTs, like European nations. There are other organizations in this country that deal more with urban design as opposed to the State Highway Department, which, quite frankly, a lot of our older guidance is based on designing highways and not designing urban downtown areas. So, but there are some other organizations that have better guidance on designing urban areas. We don't want to rewrite the book, but we want to sort of recognize that and incorporate it by at least reference into our guidance.
Right, and Heather?
Just that, in terms of planning, in the city we are decades behind where we need to be in terms of planning. And we'll be launching a master plan later this year. And from that, we want to identify some of the bigger long-range transportation goals. And certainly, improving biking and walking is going to be a big component of that. And I would like that to eventually be a launch point to putting in a specific bike plan, which we don't really have plans for right now. But down the line, that is something that we would like to see. And we want to make sure that our plans are consistent with the MassDOT's plans, with the regional plans. So we've got a lot of things coming down the pipe.
Great. Cool. Thank you both for all the work you're doing too. So I'm going to ask us to work collaboratively here. I want to take about 10 minutes for this quick workshop. The question I want you to focus on is how do we engage communities who aren't necessarily already engaged in the process. Tom was talking about the Design Exception Review Committee, but that's advocate organizations going once a month to DOT headquarters. That's a hard barrier for the average person to come across, and it relies on the advocates to do our job to make sure that we're representing our populations. Brian was mentioning the Transportation Advisory Group, which is made up of advocates in public health and a cross-section in Worcester. So that's a policy vehicle that you can use to influence it. What I want you to focus on is your communities where you come from, be it the professional realm, be it the community realm, be it the health realm, the transportation realm, wherever you are at. How can we better engage in the processes of the city's complete streets, specifically projects, or the state's complete streets, maybe specifically towards the bike and pedestrian plan, which was, we had to do statewide outreach to get input from. So I'm going to ask that wherever the closest paper is to you, to stand up. Actually, let's get everyone to stand up first off.
There are a couple here on the wall.
Yeah, there's a couple on the wall. You don't have to roam, you don't have to go, but the question is how to best engage the community you're from. So try to identify the community and then a tool for engagement. I'm hoping that we can transcribe these and share these with the presenters and just generally around. So this is a way for you to provide feedback without me putting you on the spot and handing you the microphone. You're welcome to ask questions, you're welcome to mingle. We'll take about 10 minutes for this. Walk around, stretch your legs. We'll have 2 more presentations, one specifically about Kelly Square from VHB, and we'll talk about the development process from Karen to talk about the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce. So we're going to be segueing later into a development conversation regionally and a specific project locally as well. So keep that in the back of your minds, but please go ahead and mingle and get your blood flowing, and I'll check back in about 10 minutes.